Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 6.2, The Great Detective Knows. We are back.
Christmas came early this year, baby.
Aetheral Space fans are eating good.
They really are. I was like, man, I want to see more Musashi Marie, and Tanhony was like, on God, here's an whole arc about them, plus the first two chapters are 16 pages each. That's like, in normal Aetheral Space time, that's like 5 or 6 chapters.
Exactly.
That's insane. This guy. The new Hamilton. I'm like so happy right now. Recap. Last time, Musashi and Marie were on a party boat, the Manson Musa, and they went to meet with the contender Wingmu, who was the guy we knew as Masma from, I believe, Arc 4. Wu Ming, sorry. What did I say?
I don't know if he said Ming-Wu, so it's the same thing, really.
I did it opposite way.
Yeah.
Wu Ming. And then he was like, I'm a 10 out of 10 kind of guy. Don't make me get to a 6 out of 10. Also, there's a murder happening. There's some murders happening on this planet, and we need this planet because a lot of panacea goes through it. So how about you go fix this for me? And then Marie was like, actually, that's not what we do. And Musashi was like, stop embarrassing me. And then, so they went to Nocturnus, and the governor was like, well, howdy, there's been some murder around here. I hope you can fix it. And then they saw, like, a dead body, and I think that's where it ended off.
Yeah, he got the dead guy got fucked.
Expert get owned. Expert 6.1 recap. I remember it, like, vividly, both because we read it yesterday and because I loved it so much.
Thank you.
Oh, my God, I'm so excited, dudes. Unforgivable. Atoy Musashi thought, utterly unforgivable. Governor Regan put a hand to his mouth as he viewed the grisly scene. Even Marie's nose wrinkled at the scent of dried blood and excrement. This was more than a murder. It was a desecration. Pretty interesting, huh? Said a lively voice from the doorway. Musashi turned away from the body to look. There, leaning against the... Oh, no, no, no! Musashi's internal monologue was me. There, leaning against the doorframe, was a young man with silver hair and bright blue eyes. Son of a bitch! For a moment, Musashi's hand almost went to his sheath, thinking Dragon Hadrian had suddenly appeared before him. But no, this was a different person. Oh, never mind. That whole reaction was for nothing. I thought it was Dragon Hadrian. I just saw his name, like, briefly. I was like, oh my god. His hair was longer, for one. Bound in a ponytail with pale blue highlights at the end, and the structure of his face was entirely different. A small blue fez balanced itself atop his head, and a similarly blue and white fur coat was wrapped tight around his small and slight body. His eyes scanned Musashi intently, a carefree smile on his face. Hey, he said curiously after a moment. If you got what I was doing there, good on you. What's with the hostility? That's pretty interesting, too. You thought about going for your sword when you saw my eyes, so did you have a bad experience with a cogitant in the past? You a little racist, buddy? Oh, you tensed up your back when I said that, so did they stab you in the back or something? That seems like a stretch. No, I guess they shot you then? He grinned a Cheshire grin. I'm right? This is like Dragon 2. Musashi cleared his throat awkwardly, trying his best to...
I would say.
Musashi cleared his throat awkwardly, trying his best to recover from the verbal barrage. That's correct, he admitted. I apologize. You caught me off guard. I assume you are... The young man stepped into the room, hands clasped behind his back as his eyes flicked around, observing everything. Special Officer Winston E. Gray... is it Winston E. Grace, or is that like the end of the sentence at Winston E?
Grace, yeah, it's an initial.
Okay. Special Officer Winston E. Grace. Yes, the E stands for Ezekiel, in case you were wondering. I specialize in cases like these. Regan nodded. If you're just going to say your middle name, don't abbreviate it, dum-dum. Regan nodded in confirmation. I forgot Regan's voice. Fuck, what did he sound like again?
He was sort of like this. He was a little bit...
We've been host to Officer Grace for 2 days now. Sadly, we haven't made much progress so far, but now that you two have arrived... Huh? Still loudly interrupted. Why does that remind me of the copy pasta of, like, when you see the actor at the supermarket? Furrowing his brow in bewilderment. What do you mean we haven't made much progress? No, I've solved it already. Oh my god, he's like the guy from, what were we reading? Or watching? You know what we were watching.
I don't know. We watched
the crazy supernatural detective and the money guy. And the Moonlight Tiger.
Oh, Bungo Stray Dogs?
Yeah, he's like the detective from Bungo Stray Dogs.
Rampo in there, I guess.
I've already solved it. The cabin was silent for a second as all present simply stared at Grace. The sheer power radiated from the combined disapproval of Musashi, Marie, and Regan would have been sufficient to wither a tree, but the cheerful detective didn't seem to be affected at all. He simply cocked his head, as if confused by the negative reception he was getting. "What's up?" he asked. Sir," Regan said, taking a hesitant step forward, "when you say you've solved it, are you saying you know who the culprit is?" "Yeah, of course," Grace replied casually. "What else would I mean?" Who is it, then?" Regan's eyes were wide with anticipation. "Well, if you're asking me who actually physically did it, I haven't figured that part out yet. But I figured out the motive and the people behind it, so that's not really helpful." Marie stepped forward, addressing the new arrival for the first time. "And those are?" Winston Grace looked up at Marie. He truly was small, barely exceeding 5 feet. Oh, he just like me, for real. And quickly scanned her up and down. A strange twinkle entered his eyes and died down just as quickly. Oh, he figured out she's a gene tyrant. "Well," "Well," he said, stretching the word out as he took another step forward, bending over as he looked around the crime scene. "I'd say this whole thing is something of an audition. It's happened before, after all." "An audition for what?" Musashi asked flatly. He'd known this person for less than 3 minutes, and he already found them exhausting. Based? Winston glanced at him over his shoulder.
Challenge.
Impossible. It's funny because, like, Musashi, sure, he's like the honor dude, and he's like a little bit of a corporate kiss up, but he's probably the most normal person we've ever seen in Aetheral space, like by a long shot. I don't think there's like any normal people in this story.
Dragon thinks he's normal, but he's not normal.
Skipper would actually be a great Twitch streamer.
Exactly.
Sorry, I don't know why I said that. I was just thinking about it. Winston glanced at him over his shoulder. "Darkstar," he said simply. Darkstar. The word resounded through the small room like the toll of a bell. Musashi's body stiffened in response to it. Marie's even more so. Off in the corner of the dimly lit room, Regan swallowed his saliva. The shadows seemed to press in on them. "Darkstar," Regan said hesitantly. "Sorry, what is Darkstar?" Winston's mouth spread into an innocent, almost childlike grin. So much grinning on this guy. White teeth gleamed in the faint light. "You don't know?" Regan shook his head, and Grace's attention switched to Musashi again, eyes drilling into him. "How about you?" he asked. "Do you know?" Oh my god, this guy has such gifted kid energy. I hate him. In this dark place, faced with that mercilessly inquisitive gaze, Musashi felt almost as if he were being interrogated. It was a terribly irrational thought, but he couldn't help but feel that something awful would happen if he didn't share what he knew. "Partially," Musashi admitted, shifting on the spot. "I know they're an organization opposed to the supremacy, but that's the extent of my knowledge." Naming your organization Darkstar, tell me you're menacing without telling me you're menacing. He knew that once there had been a special officer, one of the best, who had betrayed the supremacy to join up with this Darkstar organization. Nobody had known why he'd turned, and he'd killed every single person that the supremacy had sent after him. He'd once been known as Samson Rhodes, but most called him the Abyssal Knight these days. Oh, so he's still alive?
Yeah.
And it was said he was a thing no longer human. "And you?" Grace finished by asking Marie. "Pretty much the same," she shrugged. Grace's eyes narrowed in response, but he didn't question her any further. "Since none of you seem to know what the whole thing's about," he said, pulling up a discarded chair and setting himself down backwards in it, "I'll graciously explain it to you." I hate him so much.
I love him.
He leaned forward, balancing his chin atop his fists as he addressed the room. "Darkstar," he said, with more than a trace of theatricality. "Half cult, half terrorist group. They were a big issue back in the Henry era, but they died down shortly after that. They've mostly been dormant since, save for isolated incidents." He jabbed a finger towards the halo of blood sketched out on the floor. "That's their symbol. Basically, they believe that the course of human progress went along the wrong route a long time ago, before the gene tyrants even, and society needs to be reset to that point so we can take the proper path the next time around. In essence, they want the light of civilization to go out, hence a dark star." Oh my god, Ted Kaczynski? Musashi's hands tightened around luminescence. "Madness," he muttered. "Yeah," Grace flapped his arms. "It is pretty crazy. Interesting, though, right? Crazy people are usually fun to try and figure out." Marie crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "You said audition, though. How's that?" Well, as I understand it, Grace stared down at the body, tilting his head to view it from various angles. Dark Star's a pretty exclusive club. No room for dead weight when it comes to changing the world, you know? You've got to prove you'll be useful. I'd say disabling a vital supply chain for the Supremacy would do just that. If it is this Dark Star group, Regan spoke up nervously, couldn't this just be part of their normal activities? It doesn't necessarily have to be an audition, does it? Regan is totally auditioning. Musashi nodded in agreement, but Grace's confidence was unbreakable. He shook his head as if embarrassed they'd even ask something so foolish. No, it's definitely an audition. Darkstar themselves wouldn't need to show off like this. They don't have anything to prove. The people who did this want to convince themselves they're big and bad and scary. They want to convince Darkstar of that as well. Well, let's head off. Without another word, Winston Grace hopped off the chair and headed for the exit, almost skipping as he went. It truly seemed that, here among the blood and guts and shadows, he was in his element. Wait, Marie called after him. What do you mean, let's head off? Where are we going? Grace turned on his heel, pointing at the corpse with a confused frown. This guy had a girlfriend. Obviously we need to interview her about the last time she saw him. She glared. You've been here for 2 days already and you haven't even done that? He blinked. Of course not. I'm super weak, so I need you two to protect me in case something goes wrong, right? I hate him so much. Oh my god. This could have been Dragon if he had stuck around in the Supremacy. Musashi sighed to himself as he followed the two of them out of the crime scene. He wasn't sure what he'd expected from this mission, but it certainly hadn't been this. The cold welcomed him as he traded one darkness for another. Popcorn.
Ironically, Marie supposed, she was probably the most human member of this dynamic trio. Unfortunately, that meant she was also the best equipped to take care of this unpleasant task.
How is Musashi not human? Is he, pugnant or something?
Well, he's all, super honor guy. Which, so Marie's not talking, biologically here.
I see what you mean.
Philippe Goulet's girlfriend, Laura Winfried, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief as she was interviewed. Marie herself was the one doing the actual questioning, while Musashi took notes behind her, and Grace wandered around the apartment like a pest.
Do you want me to edit the line? No. Oh, you got it.
In terms of general layout, the residence didn't look much different from the crime scene they'd started at, save for lack of corpse, of course. It was a small place, almost claustrophobic, not big enough to keep secrets in, certainly. Marie honestly couldn't imagine what would drive someone to try and build a life on this depressing planet. Lack of options, maybe? Certainly nothing good. She leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on Laura's shoulder as the woman silently wept. I know this is tough, Marie said with sympathy she didn't really feel. But if we didn't catch the person who did this, we need you to be tough. Philippe was a security engineer, right? Did he talk about his work at all? Laura shook her head. No, not at all, she sniffed. He was quiet. He never talked about his work at all. Absolutely. I don't know why they would have done this to him. For a split second, Marie's sympathetic smile twisted into a smirk and reverted just as quickly. They? So you already know it was an organisation.
No, she's the culprit!
I'm so sorry, Marie went on soothingly. Do you remember the last time you saw him at all?
Wait a minute, they can be a singular. She doesn't know that that's what she means by they.
Yeah, well, that's Marie's prerogative. A couple of days ago...
Shaking my head, Marie.
Laura managed, body racked by silent sobs. He came by and stayed the night, but he left early the next morning. He said he had to get some work done. True. And do you know if he had any enemies? Anyone who'd want to hurt him? I don't know anything about that. Lie. As a genes hirer, Marie had observational skills that far exceeded any bog-standard cogitants. She barely had to squint.
I love the phrase bog standard, by the way.
She barely had to squint to see the obvious signals of deceit on this woman's face. Hardly took a detective to spot them with how bad Lara was at lying, either. Bank. Marie glanced over her shoulder, annoyance already overpowering the faux sympathy on her face. Somehow that idiot Grace managed to walk straight into a wall, nearly cracking his head open with the speed at which he'd approached it. As Marie watched, he groped at the wall, cocked his head as if he'd only just recognised existence, then turned and offered a cheap, eerie thumbs up. You'll have to forgive him, Marie said, a plastic smile struggling to stay fixed on her face. My colleagues can be a little eccentric. Popcorn.
It took nearly 2 hours of withstanding Lara Winfried's incessant weeping, but they finally managed to make it out of the apartment intact, with the information they needed. Marie spoke up smugly the second the apartment door closed behind them. Basically, she said, twirling a lock of hair with her finger, this woman knows who the killer is, and I'm betting they threatened her to keep her quiet. Since the victim was a security engineer, he probably had something the killer wanted. A way to access the security systems, most likely. It's easy to figure these things out if you pay a little bit of attention. Musashi nodded, an appropriately odd expression on his face. Well done, Officer Hazard, he said. I have to admit I didn't notice any of that. Behind him, however, Grace was simply playing on his script, playing on their phone, finger tapping away against the screen. Marie frowned. It seemed that playing around on their little devices was the best the humans of this era were capable of. Boomer?
Well, Marie is the ultimate.
You have any insights for us, great detective? She called out. He glanced up from his script. From this angle, Marie could see he was actually looking at an overhead map of the settlement, a collection of cubes vaguely forming the town, ringed by various circular buildings. He mumbled. Oh, that's great. By the way, there's 3 killers, and they're hiding out at the generator installations outside town. You could have heard a pin drop. Marie's eyes narrowed into a glare. Oh, fuck off! There's no way you figure that out just from listening to her. Grace scratched his head sheepishly. Yeah, about that. He laughed. I actually wasn't listening to her at all. 2 hours. I'll seriously beat the shit out of you. Wait, hold on! Grace waved conciliatory hands in front of his face. I admit I wasn't listening, but that was because I was doing my own investigation, right? It was very important! Everyone has their own methods, Officer Hazard. Musashi nodded. She had half a mind to hit him, too. Poor Marie, dude. Garth held up an... What?
Oh, no. Grace.
Still tell me you're stuck in Arc 5? My Aether ability is... Okay, sorry, Grace held up an arm, aquamarine Aether running across its surface. My Aether ability is called Dupin's Alchemy, he explained himself. By disabling... Wait, Aethers have names? Oh, yeah, they do. I'm dumb. He explained. By disabling one of my senses, I can boost the strength of another. I made myself deaf and blind back there for a little bit so I could get a good whiff of the place. Well, that explained him walking into the walls. Marie couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him. It must be awful to have to go to such lengths just to get a passable sense of smell. Grace held up a finger as he went on. I counted 7 recent scents, 3 of which were tinged with blood and fuel. I'd estimate those bloody scents were from around 2 days ago, which lines up with the murder. And the only place in town that uses, I assume, massive amounts of fuel are the transport ships that come in the generator installations. And the only places in town that use. No one transport ship has been around for the entire duration of this murder case. Hence, they're hiding out at the generator installations. With all the facts laid out, Grace clapped his hands together, as if trying to brush away invisible dust, and then turned the map on the script in their direction. There are 12 installations encircling Landfall 01, he said. We'll check out 4 each. Sound good? That, at least, seemed to finally be a straw too far for a toy Musashi. He stepped forward, raising a hand. Hold a moment, Officer Grace, he said sternly, looking down at him. Your deduction is splendid, but it'd be better for us to investigate each of the installations as a unit. We don't know what the enemy is capable of, after all. Grace pouted childishly. No, he insisted. They'll split up to make themselves harder to track. If all 3 of us show up at one installation, they'll just run for it. But if just one of us shows up, they'll think they have a chance against us. Then we can just bring them in. Marie raised an eyebrow. What happened to, I'm super weak? Don't worry about it. Grace waved a dismissive hand. I'm always willing to put myself in danger if it helps solve the case, so it's no problem. Anyway, come on, please! Marie and Musashi exchanged a look. When had this turned into a babysitting assignment? What do you think? Musashi asked. Popcorn.
Personally, Musashi thought it was cold. Even with his aether bolstering his body, the chill bit at him like a swarm of ravenous insects as he marched towards Installation 3, snow crunching under his feet. His bike floated in park a few metres behind, waiting for his prompt return. At this point, he didn't expect much to come from this endeavour. The first 2 installations had been empty, occupied only by automatics, and his first impression of this place seemed no different. The generator installations which drew heat from the earth below differed aesthetically from the rest of Landfall 1 in only one aspect. They were cylindrical rather than cuboid, like massive chimneys stretching up towards the sky. In any other landscape, they would have seemed unique, perhaps even artistic, but in this cold darkness, they were just shadowy monoliths over in the distance. Perhaps Marie and Winston Grace were having better luck, or perhaps Grace had been mistaken in its deduction from the start. Either way, Musashi still had his duty to fulfill. fulfill it should be. He'd searched this installation, then installation 4, and then joined back with his comrade to discuss next steps. In a flash of movement, as he whirled around, deflecting the Aether-infused punch aimed for his back with a swing of luminescence.
Oh my god, he's been training for Dragon. He fucking instantly detected... Yeah, he's honed. He has to have developed a new Aether technique to, like, detect people attacking from behind.
His attacker dodged backwards, transitioning from a cartwheel to a backflip in what was a truly impressive display of gymnastics, before landing a few metres away. It was only when the enemy stood back up to his full height that Musashi realised luminescence was no longer in his hands. Instead, it was to his opponent, attached to their knuckle like it'd been glued there. Good reflex.
This is fucked up.
Good reflexes, his enemy chuckled. Very good. The enemy stepped forward into the artificial light, revealing himself. He was a massive man, easily over 6 feet tall, a bright red mohawk and shining golden eyes. The entire body of the man was thick with muscle from head to toe. It was aesthetic, however, the body of someone who had trained for the appearance of it. Whether he had the skill to match remained to be seen. His attire was eccentric in the extreme. To put it bluntly, he was wearing a black Speedo and nothing else, not even shoes. Even without the red hair and golden eyes, that would have told Musashi he was up against a repugnant. Nobody else would have been able to walk around in such cold weather like it was nothing. Even with that in mind, though, this was hardly normal behaviour. The huge man glanced down at Luminescence, still firmly attached to his knuckles. Oh, he moaned, running a finger along the flat side of the blade. Such fine steel, too. I think I might keep it after I kill you. Do you think you'd mind that, boy? Fucking
Hisoka moment?
Jojo. Musashi kept his eyes locked on his opponent, shifting his stance from swordsman to martial artist, his palm held out in front of himself. My name is not Boy, he declared. I am a Toy Musashi, special officer of the Supremacy. I demand you name yourself, fiend. How gallant. The massive man placed his free hand against his beefy chest. I have to say, I'm feeling very intimidated right now. It's a good thing I managed to confiscate your little toothpick. If you must know, a toy Musashi, my name is Rolo. R-O-L-O. You think you can remember that? I love him.
He wrote him.
I know. That's why I do it. I love him. Mr. Rolo, Musashi said firmly, adjusting his footing on the uneven snow. I request you hand yourself over quietly. If you do so, I won't have to get violent with you. Rolo put a finger to his lips as if considering the idea. Let me think. Non. Musashi's eyes narrowed, and his gaze became steel as he unzipped his red parka. I thought you might say that. In terms of raw physical strength, this man was most likely his equal, and that ability to make things adhere to his body would make him a difficult opponent to actually hit. To win, Musashi would have to be a little tricky. Normally that idea would give him pause, but his opponent had opened this encounter by trying to hit him in the back and stealing his weapon. This hadn't been a fight from the start. With a mighty kick of infused aether, Toy Musashi launched himself off the ground. Popcorn.
Wow, chuckled the scruffy young man, looking Marie up and down as she came closer. I sure am lucky. To think they sent an elegant lady officer to catch me. I must be a pretty big deal,
I love how
huh?
you saw a scruffy young man and instantly you default into the soap.
So? He looked as if he hadn't slept for days. The beanie... Was I wrong? The
Not
beanie
really.
pulled down over his face, not quite managing to conceal the bags under his eyes and the stubble on his chin. He grinned from the entrance of the installation as he looked out at the approaching Marie. She matched his grin with a sweet smile of her own, crooking a beckoning finger. Why don't you come over and see how lucky you really are? One enemy, just as Grace had said. That was a little irritating. Nah, the man, she'd call him Beanie, rubbed his chin. I ain't stupid, lady. I'm not fucking with a special officer. Why don't you just head home? Maybe we can come to some kind of arrangement for you to keep quiet about this. Marie shook her head, the fanged grin of a predator on her face. Afraid not. She took a step forward. I don't get paid if I don't do my job. Beanie sighed. Thought not, he said, and then, suddenly moving, he hurled a red needle and thread in Marie's direction. The projectile wasn't perfectly aimed, but it writhed in the air like a snake, the path of its flight changing to pursue Marie. Every one of her senses, sharpened to their limits, came to a consensus. Danger! Despite the small size of the attack, she absolutely couldn't allow that needle to touch her. Poison? Aether poison? Aether-enhanced poison?
Who knows?
That's my guess. She set off in a sprint perpendicular to the building, making the most subtle adjustments to get legs that she could to boost her speed. Geysers of snow were kicked up behind her as she circled the installation, but the needle matched her speed 1-to-1, and it was slowly catching up. That's not 1-to-1 then, buddy. In the distance, she could see Beanie smirking sardonically. Well, if she couldn't outrun it, she'd destroy it. Marie skidded to a halt and, with those same enhanced legs, slammed her foot into the ground. A large chunk of rock flew into the air right between herself and the approaching needle, and the needle phased right through it as if it wasn't even there. From there, it was too close to be dodged. Oh, I bet he, disassembled and reassembled the atoms because it's so small. The red needle ruthlessly speared through her white parka and pierced her chest, wrapping itself around her heart. Beanie grinned. I win! Oh my god, Pesci? I always aim right for the heart! God, I love this. Winston looked around curiously, hands in his pockets, as the warehouse doors sealed around him. The entrance he'd come in through, the exit on the other side, even the windows, metal sheets slid over to cover them all, bathing the warehouse in darkness. Is this like a sneak attack thing? Winston asked, and a second later he got his answer. A wild-looking man with a wide grin and a mane of green hair. Whenever I see mane of hair, I know you probably mean like long hair, but I just think mohawk, like a horse's mane. Launched out of the darkness, a dropkick hurtling towards Winston like a bullet. The small cogitant threw himself to the ground, hands flat against the ground, and maybe threw himself to the floor, hands flat against the ground. And the attack passed over him, his attacker disappearing again into the darkness. Dupin's alchemy! For each sense Dupin's alchemy disabled, he could double the efficacy of another, and that doubling effect stacked. Oh, exponential!
Yeah.
Winston disabled his sense of touch and his sense of taste. That's bullshit, because taste is like a freebie, because you don't need that ever. Winston disabled his sense of touch and his sense of taste, boosting his sight to 4 times its original strength. Immediately the room came into view. To his newly refreshed eyes, it seemed more dim than pitch black, and he could get a good view of his surroundings. His opponent was up on the ceiling, crawling like an insect to reach the side of the room he'd originally attacked Winston from. The floor below had changed too, a chalk pattern of squares like some kind of blueprint, having covered it since the lights went out. Interesting! Winston called out, voice echoing through the space. You've got a weird power, right? Those are my favorites to figure out. My name's Winston Grace, by the way. What's yours? What is with everyone in Aetheral space, introducing themselves? To be perfectly honest, when he told Atoy Marie all that stuff about needing to split up to catch the enemy, it had been an absolute lie. If Winston Grace absolutely had to fight, he just preferred it to be one-on-one. That way, he could have a blast figuring out how the enemy's Aether ability worked. His enemy, unsurprisingly, didn't respond to what Winston had said. He was no doubt still under the impression that Winston couldn't see in this darkness. Come to think of it, how exactly was his enemy seeing without light? Just, why is enemy and was italicized? Wait,
the only one.
Was his enemy seeing without light? Just from looking at him, he seemed able to use his feet as hands to crawl around, so he was probably some kind of scurrant. Night vision must be another trait of his. Also, what exactly did these squares represent? So many questions! Going alone really had been the right call. Excuse me. The enemy reached the side of the room he'd launched his first attack, positioned himself directly opposite Winston, and lunged forward. This time choosing to attack with a punch. Too bad, so sad. Winston had already memorized his opponent's speed and strength with the first attack, so dodging again would be a piece of... The punch struck Winston in the chest a second before he went to dodge, and the young man went flying, at least one rib cracking from the force of the impact. He landed in a heap on the ground. In a heap on the ground, I assume. Yeah. Picking himself up a second later when no second attack came. Disabling his sense of touch also meant disabling his sense of pain, so getting hit like that wasn't so bad, but Winston would still prefer to avoid it if possible. He put a curious hand to his chin. What had happened? That second attack had definitely been stronger and faster than the first. Had his enemy been holding back the first time? No, that didn't make sense. He'd opened with a surprise attack, so it only followed that he would have been using his full strength at that time. Winston's working hypothesis, then, was that his enemy had somehow powered up between the first attack and the second one. He'd have to test it, take another punch, to measure if the same increase occurred between the second attack and the third. He glanced up at the ceiling. Again, the enemy was crawling towards the starting position, presumably to execute the attack again. So he was only willing to attack from that side of the room? He hadn't gone after Winston when he went flying either. Why was that? He must have some sort of, launching, if you keep attacking from the same area thing. Why was that? You know what? I bet that's exactly what he's doing. He's, reinforcing that area on the wall, and he's, thrusting harder off it each time or something. He landed in another row of the square pattern. Did the enemy's ability only allow him to attack in straight lines for some reason? It felt like he had all the pieces now. He just had to put them together. A carefree grin spread over his face. All of this was just so much fun! Popcorn.
Musashi was upon Rolo in a moment, arm pulled back from a palm strike. And then, at the last moment, he switched to a roundhouse kick instead, egg slamming into the side of the massive man's torso, the thrusters blazing from his calf, granting the blow additional speed and strength. Rolo didn't even bother blocking the attack. He just took the blow to his midsection with a grunt, which transitioned to a laugh as Musashi found himself unable to move his leg back. Just like luminescence had stuck to the man's body, as immovable if there were two parts of the same object. The palm thrust Musashi unleashed into the man's chest had much the same results, as the knee he jabbed up into Rolo's thigh. 3 attacks later, a time Musashi was well and truly trapped. Rolo himself grabbed the wrist of Musashi's only remaining free arm, chuckling to himself as that too became stuck. "You're not too smart, are you? One attack doesn't work, so you try it 3 more times? I thought special officers would have better battle sense than that. You're trapped. I can just demolish your skull with a headbutt, boy." Musashi's calm expression didn't shift in the slightest. "I thought the same of you. I am trapped, yes, but so are you. You won't be able to dodge it." Rolo's brow furrowed. Dodge what? 12 throwing knives thudded into Rolo's back, the thrusters on their hilts driving him slowly through the resistance of meat and muscle. Rolo's pale brown aether crackled and spluttered as the knives were buried up to their hilts, the thrusters driving them deep and deeper still. The sticking effect ceased, too, when Musashi dropped unharmed down to the ground, picking up luminescence and brushing the snow off the blade with one hand. Rolo fell to his knees, blood spilling from his mouth as the thrusters on the knife ceased, leaving them embedded into his back. "Oh," he slurred. "When?" Musashi glanced at him. "When I unzipped my parka, I dropped my knives into the snow and they began tunneling. With my
Oh my god! I can't believe this is the second time in as many chapters someone's used the fucking variation. What's the word I'm looking for from part 3? Crossfire variation.
With my thrusters, they can fly along any path I choose. My personally attacking you as a distraction so that you wouldn't watch the snow. Bastard. Apparently satisfied with Luminescence's condition, Musashi bared his blade. "I have a question for you. Are you the one who's been performing the killings, or are you just an accomplice? Perhaps it's a team effort. Whatever the case, I met a woman today who'd been brought to tears by what you've done. I'd recommend you answer carefully." Rolo seemed to consider his options for a moment, face twisting in concentration, before lunging at Musashi with a clumsy fist. There was a flash of silver luminescence, and then Rolo's head fell from his shoulders.
It's a little weird because luminescence is like the name of his blade, but I know you mean luminescence is in the word. I'll allow it though.
Popcorn.
And this fucking guy. "And there we have it," Beanie snickered, eyes fixed on the red thread that now connected himself and Marie. "Fight's over. Good effort. Chi-chi." Oh my god, is this Hayden? Marie, still some distance away, waved a hand through the red thread.
When I described this man.
It phased through as if nothing was even there. This was the marker of an effect then, not an actual constructed object. "What's this thing do then?" she called out. "You seem pretty smug about it." Right. Beanie chuckled, smugness almost radiating from him. "It's not much good if you don't know what it does, is it? Forgive my manners. It's just that I love easy fights, so I got so utterly lost in my joy that I forgot myself. You understand, don't you?" She began walking towards him, fists clenched at her sides. "Asshole! Answer the question! What's this thing do?" His face spread into a malicious grin. "Baby, we're linked together like binary stars now. Haven't you ever heard of the red string of fate? Any injury I suffer, you'll suffer too. You can't so much as scratch me without wounding yourself. Marie hesitated. "Oh," she thought. "Is that all?" She began walking again. "I can see you're understanding the implications," Beanie grinned. "Now that we have a contract, why don't you and I talk about a few matters? How many comrades you have? How much you know about us? That sort of thing? Oh, that look on your face. I know it's humiliating to be the first to fall, but hey..." Panic began to infiltrate his tone. "Hey, what are you doing? Weren't you listening to what I just said? Stay back! I mean it! Stay the fuck back!" Marie finally reached him, utterly demolishing his head with a single punch. A second later, her own head exploded. It was a little annoying to scoop up her bone and brain matter to reabsorb it, but that was all. She was fully regenerated not even 2 minutes later, and could only look down at the corpse of her enemy without pity. Man, she said, you really aren't lucky. You would have won easily against literally anybody else. That's actually so good. You know, the long fights in Aetheral Space are good. I'm not saying this to knock them, but like we have all these long, complicated, JoJo-esque fights. It's kind of nice for once to be reminded how strong these characters are compared to like the average person.
Yeah,
it's just so good. It's just literally any other person, he would have been like, "I won, victory's mine." The lovers. Oh my god. That's so good. What a great conclusion. Alright, I'm gonna popcorn it to you. I know I voiced the other one before, but I'm tired, and I want you to do your due.
Every time you hit me, Winston panted for breath as he stood up after the latest attack. Your next attack's even stronger. So does your ability just power you up every time you land a hit? No, it feels like it's more interesting than that. These squares on the floor, what are they about? Grinch landed back at his starting position, clinging to the railing there with his feet. Such fun, such fun. There was no better sensation in the world than watching an idiot try in vain to escape certain death. Grinch had sharpened his body and mind to the limit through countless battles, but even he was unable to suppress that little bit of glee when he saw someone like this boy fall into utter despair. It was.
Did you name this guy Grinch like the fucking character?
It's a coincidence. It was no biggie anyway. That hunger was what made him strong. Perhaps it tightened the vice just a little more, for kicks. Idiot, he giggled incessantly. Your little brain's working on overdrive, huh? You're working so hard trying to figure out what my power is, huh? Even I feel a little sorry for you, so... Hey, Grinch froze. All of a sudden, with one word, it felt as if invisible hands were tightening around his throat. The words about
SFX, dong!
The words he was about to speak died on his tongue. All he could do was stare his opponents, covered in darkness, slouched over on the other end of the warehouse. I'm sure I'm mistaken, Winston Gray said, but you weren't about to tell me what your power is, right? To be honest, there's nothing you could do that would piss me off more. I'm the kind of guy who likes to figure things out for myself. My Aether core is curiosity, after all, so it's something that I accept as part of myself completely. And since solving mysteries is the only thing that brings me pleasure, nothing's worse than when someone tries to spoil it for me. I'm sure you wouldn't do something that stupid, but I warn you anyway. If you try to just tell me the answer...
Hold on, wait, how did he like actually grab him with some sort of new ability, or is this just like his menacing aura?
This is his killing intent.
Okay, so he didn't like actually pull out like invisible hands no jutsu.
No. If you try to just tell me the answer, the young man looked up, and in the darkness of the warehouse, all that was visible to him was one glaring blue eye, pupil dilated to its utmost. I'll seriously kill you.
Da-da-da-da.
This brat was looking down on him. Anger flaring inside his brain, Grinch launched himself at him, hand ready to rip the head off its shoulders. It was his fourth time around, so he should be playing strong enough. Winston Grace just barely stepped out of the way of the blow. I figured it out anyway, he said lightly, the menace in his voice completely gone. It's checkers, right? Your power's based on checkers? I'm right? Grinch's heart skipped a beat as his ability was figured out, and as he backflipped back to the starting position, he couldn't help but feel how tired the fight had turned irreversibly against him. Winston went on. If I am right, and I'm pretty sure I am, you've turned this room into a checkerboard, hence the square pattern, and yourself into a pawn, right? When you reach the other end of the board, you get a power boost, right? Just like how a pawn becomes a king in the game, right?
Realistically, considering he made the technique, why wouldn't he just make a much simpler power-up Aether technique? Why go to the trouble of making it convoluted?
Well, let's see. Sweat dripped down Grinch's forehead. The brat was right on every count. Winston put his hands on his hips and sighed as he stirred Grinch down. It's a neat power, I guess, but you've kind of messed up with it. Aether abilities with strict conditions generally have more potent effects, just like how, when you take a piss, a thinner stream will travel further, right? But you've kind of half-assed it. If you made it so that I could get the king power boost too by making it to your side of the checkboard, you probably would have got a power boost on your end too.
Is Aether like something that can be reasoned with? Like, would it understand that you're giving advantages to the enemy for power?
So it's like your own sort of consciousness, sort of. So as long as you can convince yourself of it.
So it's very much like a Nen vow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you've picked just enough rules to limit yourself without getting enough power to make it worth it. A vein bulged on Grinch's forehead, and he bared his teeth in a growl of frustration. He wouldn't just sit here and allow this little shit to talk down to him. He'd barely avoided the fourth strike. The fifth one, powered up even more, would spell the end for him. Grinch kicked off the ground, launching himself towards Winston. I figured out your weakness, too, the boy said casually, taking a punch-point revolver out of his coat and pointing up towards the ceiling. No! Grinch planted his feet against the ground to halt his attack, but it was too late. All that accomplished was sending him skidding across to Winston Grace. The checkerboard appeared after you sealed the room, Winston smiled. Hence, it can only exist within a sealed space. Hence... Aquamarine Aether crackled up his arm, into the revolver, into the bullets, and fired. The projectile slammed into the roof, opening up a tiny hole. It was enough. The chalk checkerboard on the floor immediately dissipated into pale green aether, just as Grinch's skidding stopped right in front of Winston Grace. In a blur of movement, Winston lunged forward and firmly pressed the barrel of the gun against Grinch's stomach. I'm right? He grinned wildly, eyes wide. He pulled the trigger once, twice, thrice from point-blank range, each pull blasting a bullet into Grinch's body. The skirnt fell to his knees. Something else to keep in mind with conditional power-up types like you, Winston said, taking a step back, is that when the system providing those power-ups goes away, your aether actually goes down for about 2 seconds before resetting back to its normal state. That's pretty interesting, right?
Based fucking Winston solely acting as a way to introduce more aether mechanics to the audience. So that you can make more convoluted stand powers. I actually dig it.
Grinch looked down at his bleeding stomach, already feeling the cold spread through his body. This was bad, this looked bad, but he knew that if he got some panacea in his belly, he could come back from this. If he played his cards right, he could come back from this. There were cards he could still play. Kadashi Oliphant Hitaka, he mumbled, swaying on the spot. That's our boss. He put us up to it. The moment those words passed his lips, all the life in Winston Grace seemed to drain away.
Oh, he ruined the mystery! He's mad!
His hands dropped to his side, flopping against his hips. His smile collapsed into a slack, passionless frown. The previous intensity of his gaze faded away until his eyes were dull and dead as a corpse. Even his hair seemed to fall limp around his head. His lip trembled, just slightly. It was as if Grinch had just shot his dog in front of him. Seriously, dude? Winston sighed. And then he lifted the gun up once again and blew Grinch's brains out.
He told you he didn't like having the mystery! You ruined it!
This is what happens if you spoil Aetheral Space.
This guy is like taking don't spoils to the extreme. I love it. Honestly, I love the new Aether mechanics. I just wish that our group of heroes had known them and applied them. Because I would love to see like some weird, crazy shit Skipper does. Where it's like, if I stop my heart, the longer I keep it stopped, the more intense the resounding boom will be. I'd wager my own life for a power boost. Some bullshit. That'd be so good. This was an awesome chapter. Like I said, it's really cool that you introduced 3 characters that die this chapter, but they're still like neat and like have their own personality and energy. And I love that it kind of gives us a reminder that not everyone's like an Aether Master in like an intense battle. Sometimes people just get bodied by the strong. And it also kind of raises up Winston, Muzazi, and Marie again for the next time they show up with our main guys. Just like, oh, it was so good. It was so much fun.
And they did all
it felt like I
really wanted to get done.
What?
I wanted them to like win in different ways. Like they're not all like, I'm just going to overpower you.
Yeah, exactly. Also, IF story where Winston's all smug and curious but goes up against Beanie and fucking gets owned. I have a question. If Beanie had hurt the person he hooked, would he have been hurt as well too? Like,
No,
is it
it's
or is it?
only.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. That's so strong. Fucking
Yeah.
Pesci moment.
But another thing to keep in mind, this wasn't mentioned, but Aether would sort of repel it. So also the fact that he doesn't have Aether also was the reason why it was so easy.
So he kind of would have been owned by any Aether user, but against any normal person, it's like instant. Well, that already applies to. Actually, now that you say that, his power sucks.
Yeah, he has to get your Aether down first.
How would he do that?
By fighting you normal.
But if that's like his ability, how else would he fight?
Punches and kicks, my guy.
Wow, I'm gonna punch and kick you now. I don't think we've seen anyone run out of Aether yet. It's been described as something you can, like, start to lose, but I would really like to see sort of a fight like that, like, Part 2-esque with Joseph, where, like, he ran out of Hama, like, someone actually uses up all their Aether, or, like, gets close enough that it's noticeably different. It's like, it seems your punches aren't hitting as hard now. Are you losing your Aether? It's like, oh no, my Aether core is smug victory, and I'm losing.
And then Winston's victory method was just get the shit beat out of him until he figured it out.
Yeah. I think dulling a sense of pain with the touch is a cool element, because it lets him like be smug and weird, even though he's getting the shit kicked out of him, without it being like, oh, whatever, because at least there's like some logical explanation. I think that's a cool detail. Well, that was a good chapter. I hope you continue to put out these lengthy bangers, because like normally when I see a really long thing to read, I'm like, ugh. But like every time it's Aetheral Space, I'm like, ooh. You know what I mean? Only for Aetheral Space, dude. I think it helps too, because like in SCP, every time you read an article, you're basically like getting invested in a new story. So it's like a process again. But I'm already into Aetheral Space, so I already know that I like it and want to know what happens next. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Anyway, that's all for today, folks. Bye!
Bye!